In April of this year, a whopping 64,000 women left the workforce, meaning that they weren't employed or are not looking for a job. They're just completely out of the workforce. Now, the main factor driving this uptick of women exiting the job market is the uh, astronomically priced and inaccessible nature of childcare in America. Something that my co-host Nando Vila actually did a great decode on earlier this year. Now, I wanted to revisit the issue to explore the business community's pushback against President Joe Biden's proposed solution of publicly subsidized childcare and universal pre-K. Now, affordable childcare was already a massive societal problem prior to the pandemic. But the problem has only gotten worse during the last year. For instance, the Treasury Department reported last month that the average cost of care is roughly $10,000 a year per child and consumes about 13% of family income, nearly twice what the government considers affordable. Now, that's obviously the cost of one child. Once you have a second child, the cost can double, which is why average American families spend roughly 20% of their household income on childcare. I mean, when you really take a step back and you look at the fuller context of our economy, the fact that wages have remained stagnant since the 1970s, all of this ties into just how unaffordable our privatized healthcare system really is. Now, at the same time, childcare workers are so overworked and so underpaid that there's a severe worker shortage within the childcare sector, which only drives up the cost of childcare.
Parents who want to go back to work are faced with a new problem, a childcare shortage.
The pandemic has revealed a lot about the childcare system that perhaps people didn't see before. How fragile it is, how low paid the women doing this work are. But I'm not convinced that people really understand the disparities and pay gaps that exist in the childcare system.
More than 90% of childcare workers in the U.S. are women, and just under half are people of color. On average, they earn only $12 an hour. Most do not receive benefits, and about half are on public assistance.
So the situation is pretty awful. And what compounds the problem is the for profit, market based approach that's all about maximizing profits for shareholders. Now, that translates to high prices for parents, low pay for workers. And while similar or smaller daycares don't survive during the pandemic, for instance, the big players actually made and continue to make big money. Now, you can call them big daycare, writes Fortune, or perhaps more accurately, big childcare. KinderCare, Learning Care Group, and Bright Horizons are the largest players in the $47.2 billion childcare market, which is dominated by center-based care. So, just to give you some specific examples of how much revenue these big childcare companies or corporations bring in, for instance, in 2012, KinderCare's company revenues were about $1.45 billion. Moody's Investor Service Inc. expected Learning Care Group to post revenue of over $700 million in its 2014 fiscal year ending in June. Now, it's really hard to find detailed financial information tied to these major childcare companies. They get bought out. They do things that kind of hide or shield the true money that they're bringing in. But the fact of the matter is, the existence of these major players is certainly not helped to make childcare affordable for Americans, because the very nature of these privatized businesses is to maximize profits. That means higher prices, lower pay for workers. And I'm going to really make that case throughout this segment. Now, not all daycare centers are profitable. Again, many of the smaller ones often do fail, which leads to these so-called childcare deserts. It also limits options for parents in other parts of the country and drives up costs. And understand that childcare, despite the low pay for the workers, requires a lot of resources and a lot of skill. It's not easy to take care of a, large group of children on a daily basis, and you can't put that on one childcare worker. You need several in order to be in one given room. And what we're experiencing now is, given the high cost that could be associated with opening a childcare center, these big players remain, essentially creating like a monopolized system, and the smaller players just can't make it. Now, an anecdote that was shared by the New York Times actually perfectly summarizes the severity of this system. They write that until their elder son started kindergarten this fall, Jessica and Matt Lawley paid almost $2,000 a month for their two boys' care, roughly a third of their income and far more than their payments on their 3-bedroom house. But one of the teachers who watched the boys earned so little, $10 an hour, that she spends half of her time working at Starbucks, where the pay is actually 50% higher and includes health insurance. Now, again, when you consider the fact that wages have remained stagnant since the 1970s, it's easy to understand why mothers find that it actually makes a lot more sense to stay home with their kids rather than work all day and then see the entirety of their paycheck go toward childcare.
A lot of women, when asked directly whether or not childcare was a factor, we found that upwards of 25% of those who lost their job said it was solely because of childcare.
And even though the economy is recovering, many women still can't return to their jobs.
It's definitely the case that the lack of childcare is holding the economy back from its full potential. The degree to which childcare is holding us back compared to other factors like the lack of vaccination or the spread of the Delta variant, that's really hard to say. But we do know that the lack of childcare is certainly holding individual women back and also harming their families in terms of the loss of income.
So let me frame this in a way that might be persuasive to the business community that's currently trying to defeat Biden's budget reconciliation bill that would provide subsidized childcare. We have a labor shortage, and that labor shortage is partly due to the fact that women are unable to go back into the workforce. Childcare has become so incredibly expensive that women, in many cases, don't even have a choice to go back to work. Now, they don't want to pay more in taxes, so they're essentially looking for short-term gain, knowing that that short-term gain is going to have a long-term negative impact on their companies, right? And to be sure, there has been a negative economic impact in regard to the lack of affordable childcare. So the numbers, by the way, were already awful prior to the pandemic. Watch this video.
In a normal year, the lack of childcare costs the U.S. economy more than $50 billion because parents can't work or are less productive at their jobs. That's billion with a B. Now, that might just be a small fraction of the overall economy, but in small towns, it has a huge impact on businesses and on families.
Now, there's fortunately a solution to all of this. And the great news is that we wouldn't even need to reinvent the wheel. Now, let me be clear. I think that it makes sense to make this a public issue, something that's funded by taxpayers, that isn't privatized with a profit motive in mind. But nonetheless, the solutions that we've used in the past have worked. Let's take a look at what it was.
Millions of American men went to fight overseas, leaving many factory jobs open, which women stepped in to fill.
In war towns all over the United States, women are called upon to leave their homes and take jobs.
That created a new problem. Women who'd mostly stayed home were now leaving every day for work, and their kids needed care.
When married women with small children have to take jobs, everything possible will be done to provide day care for the children.
So Congress jumped in with a solution. It created thousands of child care centers across the country that served over 500,000 kids.
These centers were set up in the same communities where women were working in defense industries. And there's beautiful photographs of them, of children drinking milk, sitting on the floor with these very respectable looking teachers watching over them. And they were, really seen as nursery education for these children.
So that was something that was implemented by FDR during World War II, and there was a need for it. The government saw a responsibility to families, considering men were going away for war, and there were factory jobs and other jobs that needed to be filled. In fact, Kathleen Davis over at Fast Company wrote that in response to the demands of the defense industries leading up to and during World War II, Congress passed the Defense Housing and Community Facilities and Services Act of 1940. When the law was passed, only 28% of women were working, but by 1945, more than 34% of women were in the workforce. And the subsidized plans absolutely did work. And the government had the right frame of mind in regard to its personal or in regard to its responsibility to its people. So the government realized that with two parents working outside the home, it was a social responsibility to provide affordable and high quality childcare, just as it's a social responsibility to provide free public school for other children. What's important to point out about this program was that it was universal. There was no means testing. Everyone qualified for it because the idea was the right idea. If you want the economy to function properly while also engaging in World War II, you need to ensure that you have a robust workforce. That means women are going to have to work. That means that we need to find a way to take care of the kids. And so, unfortunately, this universal childcare didn't last long. Aside from that, there was also an economic motivation for the government to subsidize childcare. It needed women in the workforce, just as the economy does now. Now, the Defense Department ran this program, or not ran this program, but the Defense Department jobs had then essentially dried up as the war came to an end. And there wasn't really a need for it anymore. Women were forced back into the household to be mothers. But it wasn't until 2 decades later where the government stepped in again with the Head Start program as part of Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty. So this happened in 1965, and it was part of the civil rights push and an effort to counter desegregation. So it applied mostly to poor and mostly Black families where they received some assistance for pre-K programs. The programs were not universal. It only applied to those who were living in extreme poverty. And it wasn't until 1971 where Congress actually did manage to pass bipartisan legislation that would offer Americans publicly subsidized childcare. The only problem was it was also during the Cold War, during the Nixon administration. This is 1971. And he decided that he was going to veto it because he believed in the traditional family where the woman stayed home and the man went to work. And there was also, of course, Red Scare going on with the Cold War. Now, then things, believe it or not, actually got a lot worse. And that happened during Bill Clinton's welfare reform, which made the already threadbare social safety net even worse.
From now on, our nation's answer to this great social challenge will no longer be a never-ending cycle of welfare. It will be the dignity, the power, and the ethic of work.
It changed welfare and the way that welfare is implemented so that women were forced to go to work. It's no longer feasible that you can get welfare assistance and stay home with your children for a long period of time.
The law also expanded a program that provided families with vouchers to help pay for the childcare they'd now need.
The way that our federal childcare system is now designed, it's extremely fragmentary and it deepens inequalities because there are limited centers of high quality that will take those vouchers. If a woman's schedule changes, she could lose her voucher. If she works more hours one month than another, she might become ineligible and lose her subsidy, in which case she loses her ability to work. And then she has to go back on the waiting list. And then because the system is underfunded, there's many eligible families who are not able to access that kind of support.
Not able to access that support. I mean, think about it. In order to be able to, qualify for those childcare vouchers, you need to be working But in order to work, you need childcare. I mean, the system sets families up for failure. There's really no other way to look at it. Now, again, there are solutions that we've tried in the past, solutions that are actually being promoted by Joe Biden and progressive Democrats. Elliot Haspel, the author of Crawling Behind, explains that there's only one clear solution to making childcare affordable and accessible for all.
The only thing that can fill that gap is public money, and we refuse to wrestle and acknowledge the fact that that's the only thing that's going to make a viable, sustainable, high-quality system is public money, because otherwise programs cut corners by slashing wages to the bone, not offering benefits, finding quality sort of workarounds. And I understand, because their other option is to close, and we have childcare deserts all over the place. Access is already an issue. And so they don't have any other option. In order to keep your budget in the black, you basically have to be at full enrollment all the time. You have to be charging enough money to cover your costs all the time, and you have to be collecting the money from your parents all the time. And if any of those things go down, the entire enterprise crumbles and you're in the red.
Yeah, it's a pretty sucky system. And when you compare the United States to other countries, developed countries that are doing things a little differently, you can understand why we fall behind. Now, let's just break down how much the United States government spends on childcare per child compared to other developed countries. Now, in the United States, federal, state, and local governments spend about $1,000 a year on care for low-income children ages 2 and under, and $200 on other toddlers. For children under 3, only the poorest working families qualify for subsidies, but fewer than 1 in 6 even receive the help. The only government support for early care comes from the Child and Dependent Care Tax Credit. It benefits higher earners most. The average credit is $586 and $124 for the lowest earners. Now, again, remember, things are tied to a person working, how much money they make. But when you look at other developed countries, they certainly do things far differently. Look at the rich countries, which contribute an average of $14,000 per year for a toddler's care. These are, of course, other rich countries compared to the United States. Now, wealthy countries in the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development spend an average of 0.7% of GDP on childcare. In Europe, new parents have paid leaves of, oh God, this always makes me incredibly jealous, 14 months. And it's common for children to start public school at the age of 3. Nordic countries have the most generous childcare systems. Denmark, for example, spends $23,140 per child on care for children 2 and under. But our politicians would have you believe that our system is the best. We're exceptional. Look at how great we are, as people struggle to get back to work because they can't afford the privatized market-based childcare that's offered to them. Now, the Biden administration does propose doing something about this, and that is the legislation that's commonly referred to as the Budget Reconciliation Bill. It's also the bill that Bernie Sanders is tirelessly championing, rallying for, and doing incredibly annoying cable news interviews for. He's trying to get people to understand the importance, and I hope this segment helps you do that too. Now, the huge social policy bill being pushed by President Biden would cap families' childcare expenses at 7% of their income, offer large subsidies to childcare centers, and require centers to raise wages in hopes of improving teacher quality. A version before the House would cost $250 billion over a decade and raise annual spending fivefold or more within a few years. An additional $200 billion would provide universal pre-kindergarten. But the fate of that bill, as some of you might already know, is a little shaky. You have corrupt Democrats in the Senate who are far more interested in listening to their corporate donors and other members of the business community, people who fund their campaigns, who certainly don't want the passage of this bill, even though it would actually really help benefit their own businesses by ensuring that there's a labor force out there that's willing to work. But of course, they don't want to fight for it. They want to continue cutting their taxes. And it really is a short-sighted move considering what their personal interests are. I talk about it during a debate I had recently with Ben Shapiro.
Are you talking about the $3.5 trillion reconciliation
I'm talking about the $3.5 trillion bill.
The $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill offers universal pre-K, which opens up the opportunity for mothers to go to work if they want to go to work. The $3.5 trillion bill, by the way, has all sorts of subsidies for corporations, which I don't really understand why the business community isn't salivating over that, because rather than just going full force with public programs, which I think would be the right way to go, it's offering all sorts of subsidies in these, public-private partnerships. Now, the physical infrastructure bill has a lot more corporate giveaways, which is why the, business community absolutely loves it, offers the chance to privatize public infrastructure, which is why the business community absolutely loves it. But at the end of the day, if we don't create a society where Americans can actually have families and go to work, then we're going to be in a lot of trouble.
We're going to be in a lot of trouble, and we're certainly already seeing that play out with the so-called labor shortage. And Nando, you talked about this in detail a few months ago. And how did I do? Did I get it right?
You did great. What are you talking about? I don't need me to tell you that. You did great. Very, very interesting. I mean, it was great. That PBS clip of the guy talking about the private centers. I mean, that's capitalism, baby. That's, the difference between a private enterprise and a public enterprise is the need for profits. I mean, I won't say there's any benefits to like markets for certain type of goods or whatever, but like for things that people need, it just makes absolutely no sense. It just, that's why, the easiest way I always explain to people is like, you might like using FedEx more than the post office or whatever, but like, if we only had FedEx, they wouldn't ship to all the places. They just wouldn't,
Nope.
Because it's costly to go to like some remote village in Alaska or whatever. And so that's there's a similar version of that with childcare, where like certain communities, poorer communities, whatever, that can't afford as much as richer communities. Well, then if you're a guy running a private childcare center, you're not going to go to the friggin' poor community. They can't pay, go to the rich community. They can pay all they want, and you can charge them whatever you want to do, like whatever, make your kids do yoga or something,
Totally. I mean, the thing that really stands out in so many of the different like decode segments that we do is how utterly self-destructive capitalism really is, right? Because that need to maximize profits, which means, lower taxes, corporate taxes, treating workers like crap, all of that stuff, underfunds like the human infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, all the infrastructure necessary for those companies to even exist, right? And I just love to see it now where they're like, I mean, think about why they took Biden's agenda and they divvied it up into two different bills, right? Because in their minds, it's just the physical infrastructure that matters. Who gives a shit about the personal or human infrastructure? But no, human infrastructure is incredibly important too. They're just too short-sighted to see it because all of the incentives are to be short-sighted, know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the key there. It's like, it's not that they're bad people. I mean, they are bad people, but that's not the point. The point is like if they were good people, they'd be replaced by the bad people, because they're not just their incentive, but their existential need is to maximize the profit of their own company. Not to even look at themselves as like a sector or even, like that. Like they need to destroy the people the other people in their sector too. So like, that's why you get this kind of thing. It's like, well, don't you guys need the roads and the thing? It's like, yeah, we need all that stuff. But like, we don't want to pay for it. Just have someone else pay for it. We can't pay for it,
Right.
Because they need to maximize profit all the time, every single second of the day, every waking hour, and if not, they will be replaced by someone who is willing to do that. So
yeah. I mean, we'll see what happens with the reconciliation bill, but it just blows my mind that the Senate's on recess right now and cinema's like literally in Europe fundraising.
She's drinking Aperol Spritz, being a yath queen.
She's being a boss girl.
If you enjoyed this video from Jacobin Weekends, please hit like and subscribe. That way, you'll enjoy all of our backlog, as well as all of our future content, including interviews, live streams, and clips. Thank you.